and welcome back to Finding the Balance with me, Chase, here hosting as always, and returning to do another little episode here. My goal for this one is to try and squeeze in basically 3 topics within an hour. So I'm going to try and do that. We'll see what happens. Now, that may not happen. The third one obviously being the Screwtape Letters. I want to continue that. I haven't lost sight of that. I know I haven't made one of these in about a week or so. Just had a lot of things going on. It's just, you know, I don't, this isn't something I do, like I plan on making a living off of, obviously. I don't want to just like I would love to have a routine going, but I don't always, you know, I guess have something I think worthwhile to say. So I just don't. I'm like, oh, I can't really think of anything that would be show worthy right now. So I guess I'm just not going to do one this week. So it was just kind of surprising given things are going on, but I do have some things I want to talk about here. But and hopefully I can get to getting back to the Screwtape Letters, but I don't really know because I'm going off the cuff here. No notes in front of me, nothing. I want to talk about 2 things, and I suppose I'll start with the first one because it's fresh on my mind because I saw a post about it. And I guess what I'll do is I'll go look at the post. I think it's worthwhile. I mean, there were 2 things I saw. One of them I'll just kind of describe, sort of just sort of in general what it's talking about. But the other one, I can look at, and I think this is worthwhile to check out. But I want to talk about voting for Trump. Is it sinful to vote for Trump? Now, this is a conversation in the abolitionist movement, especially, that's been kind of causing a bit of a stir. And I made a video that I put on YouTube. To be honest, I put it on YouTube because I couldn't fit it on my my phone and then put it to Facebook. So I had to either YouTube or it's gone. So I put it on YouTube. I have so many photos, I think, and videos that don't really get published on my phone, and yeah, so I gotta sort through that, and I'm not gonna do it, but I got to. Anyways, so I made a video about why I'm voting for Trump, and I've been in sort of debates with guys from the abolition movement, saying voting for Trump is like a no-go. Like, you can't do that. You can't really be a consistent Christian, at least. They won't. I don't think most of them go so far as to say, at least the ones I've dialogued with, don't go so far as to say you're not really a Christian if you vote for Trump. They don't say that, but that it's inconsistent with the Christian worldview and these things like that. And so I wasn't originally going to talk about this until I saw this post. And I'll just read it here. It says, there's nothing that biblically demands me to vote for either or, neither is there anything in the Constitution that demands me to vote, which is true. I'm very tired of being accused of sin because I cannot vote for either candidates without violating my conscience. Now, I don't know if anybody's doing that. I don't think they should, because and that's going to be my main point here. Donald Trump supports and endorses homosexuality, and don't even get me started on the number of times he has funded Planned Parenthood. I don't know. I hear mixed reports about this Planned Parenthood thing. I see a lot of good Christians say that he's done more to fight against Planned Parenthood. I mean, I got some really good sources that say that he is fighting Planned Parenthood. And so I'm not exactly sure what to do with that. I guess it just depends on who you're going to believe. It's not like you and I are seeing the actual, you know, funding go through or whatever. We're just reading reports about it, right? I mean, but I don't know. It's not a matter of not wanting to discriminate. It's a flagrant approval of blatant sin. For those who want to argue that homosexuality is a lesser evil, I have more biblical evidence to show that it is not a lesser evil than you have to show that I am in sin for not voting for Trump or Biden. Have you completely forgotten about Sodom and Gomorrah? Did God consider it a lesser evil when they were literally wiped off the map for their homosexuality? I remember when Obama made homosexual marriage legal, and every single Christian that I knew was furious, and they should be. It's an abomination for God, and we should be abhorrent with it. But these same people that were enraged with Obama are brushing off Donald Trump doing the exact same thing as a lesser evil. Now, at that point, I know she's not talking about me, because I'm not doing that. So, it's obviously talking about another group of Christians. There you go. When Obama does it, everyone is enraged, but when Trump does it, it's not that severe. At least with Obama, he wasn't approving abominable sin in the name of Christianity. Even God himself says that he would rather you were cold than to be so lukewarm that he vomits you out of his mouth. And for everyone complaining about the pedophilia, just stop and ask yourself, how do you think we even got there? We've been warning everyone from the start that the moment they approved homosexual marriage, pedophilia was going to be next, which is obviously true. I mean, I agree with that. I don't care if Christians want to vote or not, but to tell someone they are in sin for not voting for Trump is uncalled for. There, end of rant. I think that last sentence is a little, I don't know, maybe not contradictory to what she said before. This is a friend on Facebook, Stasia, who's I got nothing against her at all, you know. She's obviously very, very passionate here, which is great, and it's fine. I just read this, and the reason why I'm doing this is because I think there's a group of people of Christians who are voting for Trump who are not getting a fair representation. Again, like I've been trying to tell people, we're living in this society. It's an either or. You're either this or you're either that. There's never any kind of gray areas that you have to think carefully through and navigate through. I think we need to really seriously return to that kind of thing, but that kind of maturity. I think it's honestly maturity to realize, you know, it's not always as cut and dry as we may want it to be. Things are a little bit more complicated. So I want to sort of express, you know, again, my voting for Trump. So I made an article too, by the way, about this that I'm going to be linking to in this video. I made an article about my argument for why I'm voting for Trump. And in that article, I go through the lesser of two evils argument. I go through the vote that counts argument. The two essential arguments that people make for either side to vote for their guy or whatever, gal. Pretty soon it's going to be it. If we last that long, which I don't even think we are, to be honest with you. That's pretty sad when you think about it. But you gotta laugh, man. You just gotta laugh. So I begin the article with a huge backstory of where I'm coming from, and it's important for me to know, to as long as it was important for me to sort of detail that so that you understand where I'm coming from. I don't have a MAGA hat. I never have one of those. Not because I'm afraid to wear one, but because I'm not a Trump cheerleader by any stretch of the imagination. Not a Trump cheerleader at all. If Trump was funding Planned Parenthood, then I think that would be really problematic. I think what it actually is there's a lot of bureaucratic stuff. Again, this is this stuff that the gray areas, obviously. Planned Parenthood is being funded. Trump's administration is in charge. Therefore, Trump is funding Planned Parenthood. I think that's what it actually is. And, you know, I just don't know if that's really, if you're being honest, I don't think that's exactly conclusive. I mean, obviously, yeah, you might say, well, under his administration, it's still being funded. Okay, I can sign on to that. Be a little more clear than that. You make it sound like he's doing it intentionally, like he wants it funded or something like that. And I don't think he does. I honestly think Trump does not want abortion to continue. But I don't want to get too ahead of myself here. But I don't. When Trump makes blunders, it's important to call him out on that, which I think he handled, you know, the COVID thing very poorly. I think he did, absolutely. It's just I mean, what the heck are you thinking, dude? I mean, it just didn't make any sense the way he was handling this whole thing. He's kind of in this ruckus that he's in. He's pulling himself out, but he wouldn't be in this situation if he had handled the coronavirus thing in the right way, the way Sweden did it. I think he would have been so much better off. I mean, Biden wouldn't be having a chance. And so, there you go with that. But anyways, I'm I don't watch Sean Hannity. I don't pay attention to any of that stuff. Fox News and whatever. The only thing worth watching on Fox News is Tucker. That's pretty much it. But I used to be a GOP shill. I used to be, not anymore. So my voting for Trump is definitely, as I say in the article, I'm voting for the lesser of two evils. But I've had to think about these things these past few months, and again, maybe I am compromising. I don't think I am. I think what's happened is, honestly, I think it's kind of like when you talk about, if you were in a dire situation, where you had to. You remember that? I don't know if you remember the shooting that happened at that church, where killed two guys. Dude came in with a shotgun. He kills two guys with it, and he turns to the pastor, and then he gets shot in the head by another one of the security guys. It's all caught on camera. And what you notice, the first guy who got shot and went down, he died. The first security guy, you see him kind of go for his gun, and then he freezes. He freezes right there. And that moment of being freezing cost him his life. He could have drawn, boom, fired, but he froze. And I think I was talking to somebody about this, a fellow brother. I think what happened in that moment is he froze. It happens to people, and I'm afraid. I hope it doesn't happen to me. I hope I will have the willpower to do what has to be done and draw and shoot. Not that I want to, but that if it has to happen, it's got to happen. So we sit here and we armchair a quarterback sort of thing, like, oh, I would have done this and I would have done blah 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 blah, and all that kind of stuff. And we don't really know what we'll do until the moment of clutch comes. That clutch moment comes, until we're put in that situation, until we're put in dire situations. That's when you really find out who you are. And so I have to ask myself, did I just really find out that I'm a coward who actually compromises, talks about standing up from principle, and then actually compromises at the end of the day? Maybe. I kind of like to think that what I have done what it's caused me to do is when we're in these, we're talking about the end of the world, at the end of America. It's like, I think we're really here now. I think we're really at the final stages. I think it's going to take a couple of years for it to finally completely break down, but it's happening. I really believe it. And so in the years before this, we sit here and it's easy to talk about the end of the world and stuff like that, and I'm going down on my principles. But then when the moment happens, when it starts to happen, when the reality is actually there, you kind of go. I like to think that I kind of went, man, I need to think about some of this stuff. I mean, some of the stances I've taken, and to be clear, up until March, when the COVID stuff blew up, I was still not going to vote for Trump. Even probably in the middle of this whole COVID craziness, I wasn't going to vote for Trump. The main reason was because he didn't really even need my vote anyway. There's no way he could lose. But when the COVID stuff started happening, when all this insanity began to happen, the riots, the Black Lives Matter stuff just exploded out of the gate all of a sudden, it became very clear to me that that Legion came out. There is an absolute diabolical desire to take him down. Let me just say here, as I said in the article, I am not trying to paint Trump as some kind of messiah. Woe is he, and they persecute him, and blah blah blah. That is not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that it's something that should be thought about. Has the left ever done anything like this to anybody before? No. What is it about Trump that makes the demons come out. I mean, again, he's not a messiah, not a messiah at all. I think what it is what Trump represents. Trump is, he's outside the political sphere, essentially. He's in it now, but essentially he's outside the political sphere. He is an outsider, and when when an outsider comes into the camp, people don't really know what to think. It's kind of, it is, in a certain sense, you look at a guy, you look at Jesus. I'm not, again, not comparing Trump to Jesus, but you look at Jesus. Here's a guy who's an outsider. They didn't know what to do with this guy. He was an absolute threat. He disrupted everything about he was ruining the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the Zealots' plans to, whatever plans that they had for Israel. He was ruining all of it. That's why they had to get rid of the guy. They had to get rid of Jesus because of that. Trump, in another sense, not in the messianic sense, is kind of like that. There's something about him that drives them absolutely insane. And they're willing to put people in harm's way. I mean, they have upped the stakes tremendously. If Hillary had won, I don't believe we would be in the position we're in right now. We would still be kind of steadily going along down straight the path to hell. But Trump has just upped the stakes big time. And so there's something about that, I think, that we have to seriously consider. And it made me have to rethink some things, that they're willing to go this far to defend their plans of world domination, essentially. Man, I mean, basically what it tells me is we've landed a blow, a serious blow. You know, when you see in the UFC fights, when one, they can one of the fighters can look really confident, and everything and all that stuff, and then he takes one good crack, one good hit, and now he's panicking. And they say that fighters tend to resort to their base instincts when they get rocked. Sometimes they just kind of do a little bit of flailing and stuff like that, and kind of go into a berserk mode thing, trying to fend off this guy while they're trying to recover, that kind of stuff. Maybe that's what's happened to the left, that they have they've been struck at a weak area. They've been sucker punched, and they are flailing. I think that's what we're seeing. And so when I'm voting for Trump this coming election, it's not because of his stance on homosexuality. I wish he would change that. It's essentially the reason why is because I want to see the gospel go forward, to press forward. And I know it always will, no matter what. But I see my voting for him as how I'm doing that. I want Christians to still be able to, in the next couple of years, be able to go out to the abortion clinics and continue to plead for the life of the unborn, to reach out to the lost everywhere, those kinds of things like that. And so my vote for Trump allows me to do that. Trump is not he's not a huge Christian guy, obviously, but he's also not anti-Christian. He's not anti-abolition. There's a lot of abolitionists that I know who just have this idea, I guess, that if you don't support abolitionism, you're against abolitionism. And again, that's where I just have to say, guys, I just think that's very simplistic. That's not fair. I honestly doubt Trump even knows what abortion abolitionism is, because it's kind of a small movement. Not very big. He probably never even heard of it. Why don't we try and get his attention and try to see if we can sit down and talk to the guy, I think that would be good. But I also saw a post about, it shares a bunch of memes. I've seen it several times. It makes fun of people who say we've got to vote Republican because they'll get these judges in. Let's vote Republican in 1970 something because we'll get the right judges in. It's Charlie Brown with I forgot the other character's name. I'm sorry. Keep voting. You have to keep voting Republican because of judges. Keep voting Republican because of judges. And again, I get the argument. I totally get it. I believe me, I sympathize with it. And I think that to a certain group of people, that definitely applies. But it doesn't apply to everybody. There's a gray area here, I think, that needs to be considered, at least. That I don't expect Trump to, end Roe v. Wade or anything like that. I don't expect him to do any of that stuff. And so you go, well, then Chase, why are you going to vote for Trump if he's not going to do these things? Excuse me. Honestly, it's going to sound crazy. But because I don't put as much investment in the political process as I think you do. I know that sounds crazy, but let me explain. I don't believe Trump is going to do a whole lot to end abortion. No, that's always going to be up to Christians to step up to the plate. But again, he's not going to actively get in the way. I don't see any evidence that he's going to do that. And so, in other words, I'm not relying on my president to really do that. I'm just relying on my vote for him allowing me room to continue to do those things myself with the Christians. I'm not relying on the president to do it. And that I think, honestly, if you think that the president if you think that it's up to the president to do this, and since he's obviously not really in that ballpark, well, I'm not going to vote for him. I think that kind of proves that maybe you rely too much on the political process than I do. I think that's something worth considering. And so I think it's a little bit ironic when I hear people say, I'm never voting for Trump because he's not the perfect candidate and all that stuff. I think you tend to put a little bit more stock in his, role as some kind of supreme leader, political leader, than I do. I have almost no confidence that he's going to do it at all. But I know that he's not going to be actively getting in my way when I attempt to do these kinds of things. So, I really think that's worth considering. But like I said, with these posts about voting for get the judges in and stuff like that, the way I see it. So when I sum all this up, this part of this segment here, it's like what Ted Cruz said. You need to vote your conscience. I think there are only two kinds of people that I think have an idolatry problem in this whole thing. Anybody who seriously thinks the Democratic Party at this point is Christian by any stretch of the imagination. I think that's idolatrous. I think that's sinful. Secondly, if you're the political Christian, it's kind of like Sean Hannity. No disrespect to Sean Hannity, although I'm not really a fan. Who see that the way that we make a difference in the world is by the political process, and so I'm going to support the Republicans no matter what. And it's kind of like what my pastor said a couple weeks ago. That you're the kind of Christian who's known more for your politics than you are for your Christian convictions, than you are for being a Christian. I think, and so that's the Christian who's voting for Trump. They're the ones who got the MAGA hat. They're running around, make America great again, keep America great. Oh yeah, Trump is amazing. He's so awesome. I love Trump and everything. I think that would be a bit of a problem. I think there's a little bit of idolatry there because Trump he's got a lot of issues, obviously. And so, to me, honestly, if you're in the area where you're voting for Trump as a means to an end, and that end is the gospel going forth to continue to go forth, I think I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I do not see how there is anything wrong with that. I just don't. Again, as long as you're not some dogmatic Trump cheerleader, that I think is fine. I think that's voting with a sober conscience. Your voting is led by the glory of God going forth. Again, you're not voting because Trump is a messiah. You're voting because while he is not great, he's not going to impede your ability to continue to preach the gospel. So, I mean, why is that bad? I don't understand why that's bad. At the same time, like what Stasia said, if you don't vote for Trump, you don't find that you can do it. I just can't justify doing it. Great, that's your thing. You've made that decision, and I'm like, that more power to you. That's fine. You do your thing. I'm not gonna come down on you or anything like that. The only thing that I why I'm looking at this little article she wrote is that let's just make sure though that we're clear here of the kind of people you're talking about, because obviously I didn't see my position represented here as someone who is going to be voting for Donald Trump. I didn't see my position anywhere in there, and I just wonder if some folks are aware of that. I think it's important to be aware of those things. I think it's important to consider these things, to think about them, to be willing to have our minds changed. And, again, you don't change your mind, that's fine. Again, I like I said, I completely understand why Stasia and others aren't going to vote for Trump. Totally get it, and that's fine. Could I see some grace coming the other way for people like myself? I think it's extremely. I think it demonstrates very poor judgment and clouded thinking. If in any situation, like I saw a post from a guy who's just an anti-Calvinist. He made a poll in a group that I'm in, asking Calvinists which of these statements they agree with, and so he gave the statements in all these poll options. And I'm looking at each and one of every one of the options, and I'm like, dude, you made like 6 or 7 of these, and you didn't get any. I don't agree with any of them. You didn't get one right. I mean, if you're so poisoned against a position, you can't even, if your life depended on it, you can't even represent it even that much. You can't even probably represent it that for a moment. You have an imbalance. You are incapable of thinking clearly about this issue. You just constantly see this other position as it's bad, and so because that presupposition runs rampant in your mind, it doesn't allow you to do an honest representation of it. And I want to be able to say that I can do that with positions I disagree with. If people ask me about the Lutheran position on baptism and whatnot and faith alone, I think I would like to think that I could say, well, this is what they believe, and I can, without my biases constantly getting in the way, I can represent it as the way this is what they believe. And the same thing with like dispensationalists. I'm not a dispensationalist by any stretch of the imagination, but when people ask me, hey Chase, what do dispensationalists believe? I want to be able to say, this is what they believe, this is how they get to this is their sort of grid that they use, and in comparison to covenant theology and whatever, I want to be able to say that I can put my biases aside to properly represent somebody's position whom I do not agree with. I think that demonstrates clarity of mind, someone who really wants to know truth. Because part of knowing truth is knowing the truth of what someone believes. I think that's very important. It doesn't mean that what they believe is right, but they do have a conviction. So there's that. So I have a text here that I want to read. Check and make sure my fan's on. It's kind of warm in here. I was thinking about this as I was watching a clip from John MacArthur on Fox News, where John MacArthur talked about how, he was asked a question about, basically how we got here to where we are, which is a good question. And he just kind of gave a very brief answer. Obviously, you're on a Fox News segment. You've got like a minute tops to answer the question. And he went on about the cultural shifts and whatnot. It just got me to thinking about, again, sadly, he doesn't get a whole lot of time to explain that, to unpack that. And so I'm just constantly thinking, he's right. He's right, obviously, and I think he knows how he's right. But I'm still just kind of going, how though? How does it happen? How do things like this happen? How do we have such a cultural shift, like we're seeing today? The Christian heritage that this country was founded upon, now foreign to the people who walk this land, most of them anyway, the vast majority of them, even those who call themselves Christian. So what I wanted to do as I was thinking about this, I was drawn to a passage here in Exodus, and that's what I want to start here with. It's in Exodus chapter 1. I will leave it to your discretion whether or not you want to read along. I'm reading in the ESV. It's just my favorite translation because I'm a dirty, rotten Calvinist. In Exodus chapter 1, starting at verse 6, it says, "Then Joseph died, and all his brothers, and all that generation. But the people of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly. They multiplied and grew exceedingly strong, so that the land was filled with them. Now there arose a new king over Egypt, who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, Behold, the people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply, and, if war breaks out, they join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land. Therefore they set taskmasters over them, the Jews, to afflict them with heavy burdens. They built for Pharaoh store cities, Pithom and Ramses, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied, and the more they spread abroad. And the Egyptians were in dread of the people of Israel. So they ruthlessly made the people of Israel work as slaves, and made their lives bitter with hard service, in mortar and brick, and in all kinds of work in the field. In all their work, they ruthlessly made them work as slaves." So, I think we know the rest of the story. Obviously, they begin to slay the boys, the sons, to keep the Jews from multiplying and stuff like that. And this is what happens to the Jews after Joseph essentially lives happily ever after. And at the closing of Genesis. And I think this text really illustrates to us what has happened in our day and age. I saw in a lot of ways the Christian church in her relationship to the world. You notice again the church spreads under persecution. It grows stronger. It's just a very fascinating thing. And you see the same thing here. The more the Jews were being oppressed, the more they multiplied. It's just very fascinating. But Joseph, we don't see a whole lot really. You got to kind of read between the lines of Joseph's relationship to the king or to Pharaoh. But it's very clear, especially towards the end of Genesis, that Joseph and Pharaoh, they're practically brothers. I think Pharaoh really had a brotherly love for Joseph, because he grants Joseph's people to live in Egypt. I think in Geshem, I think that's what it was called. And when Jacob, Joseph's father, is going to die, he allows Joseph to go and bury him properly. There's obviously, at the very minimum, a tremendous respect for Joseph. There is a strong friendship between these two. Joseph, with his leadership in Egypt, practically the right-hand man of Pharaoh. He is an incredible leader, an incredible governor for Pharaoh. And so not only does his dealings during the famine help Israel, but it also helps the Egyptians and it helps Pharaoh. He was you might say a Renaissance man, I don't know, but something just like a true leader of his day. He was just an amazing guy. So obviously they have a great relationship, and that in turn creates incredible opportunities and blessings for Israel, because essentially who is the leader of Israel, Joseph, has an amazing relationship with probably the most powerful man in the world at that time, the Pharaoh. Their strong relationship and friendship allows Israel and the Egyptians to live in peace, to live together without any kind of cynicism towards each other, fear, anything like that. They are friends, and so there you go. But then you get this text right here. After Joseph dies, and all his brothers, and all that generation, but the people of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly, and then they multiplied and grew exceedingly strong, as the land was filled with them. Then you get verse 8. Now there arose a new king over Egypt, who did not know Joseph. So this is decades later, generations later. This new king never even grew up seeing Joseph. He never knew Joseph. Never met the guy. Maybe heard about him. That's about it. So this is many, many years later. He didn't know who he was. Now, I don't know about you, but me personally, I'm a very personal guy. It's very hard for me to connect with people. There's rare occasions, but it's very hard for me to connect with people I've never met before. It's not to say that many of the Christians I've never met aren't true brothers in the Lord, and that's not what I'm saying. But we haven't met before, and as much as when I hear of difficulties in the lives of fellow believers, and when I contemplate upon those things, it definitely does break my heart, and I can relate in many ways. There's still this distance between us. I have to be honest. With me, that's the way it is. Maybe that's just the way the Lord put me together. It's hard for my empathy to reach that bound. And like I said, I pray for people I've never met before, but still, they're not always on my mind. I'm not constantly thinking about, I hope such and so is okay. For me, I tend to do that more towards the people I know personally in my life, in my personal bubble. That they're where I direct most of my attention to, because I know them. I've met them. There's that personal relationship. And all those kinds of things. My fellow believers at church, I care about them. I love talking to them. I love hearing what they have to say. And I want to help them whenever they need help with anything. They need somebody to talk to, whatever. It's hard to have that same amount of empathy for someone I haven't met. Mormons, I've met a couple Mormons personally, and don't know them. Don't have personal interactions with them anymore, but because of the original personal interaction we have, I always want to know how they're doing, and every time I see some of them every once in a while on Facebook, and I go, oh, that's great. One of them, he just got married, and I think he did. I know he got engaged, but I think he got married. I could be totally wrong on that one, but I know he's engaged, and I just, every time I'm seeing him and his fiance, I'm just, my heart melts. I'm just so glad. I'm just so happy for him. I hope that he finds the true gospel, but but because I've met him, and he's just a really cool dude, smart guy, smart young man, very, very nice, despite our disagreements. But I had that personal interaction with him that I don't have with some of the other Mormons I've engaged with on social media. It's not that I don't care about them, but it's just very different. It's just not the same. And so when you have a king here who didn't know Joseph at all, didn't know anything about him, he didn't know Joseph's relationship to his grandfather or whatever, whatever his relationship to the Pharaoh that knew Joseph was. He didn't know either of them. So he's not actively engaged in the history that Joseph was involved in with the Pharaoh before him. So, like I said, there's no personal story there. And that creates an instant distance. And it's because of that, he doesn't have that same care for Joseph and his people that former Pharaoh did. And as a result, you see, behold, the people are, he says, behold, the people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them. So he doesn't trust them. These are foreigners in his land, you know. He doesn't know, again, he doesn't know the history of Joseph and the former Pharaoh. He doesn't know their friendship. It means nothing to him. And who knows, maybe he wasn't even taught the proper history of it. Maybe that could be the reason why he doesn't, you know. Lest they multiply, and if war breaks out, they join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land. So is there any evidence that Israel is doing that? It has anything to, is there any evidence that Israel is plotting and hoping and waiting for an opportunity for an enemy to come and invade the land, and gives Israel that opportunity to take even more? Is there any evidence for any of that? No, there's no evidence for that anywhere. But he thinks so because he doesn't know these people. They're strangers to him. And one of the things I've tried to tell people is that when strangers encounter each other, they don't know how to act among them. Oftentimes, the natural recourse is this is a threat. And the best way to satiate that kind of thought and attitude is to talk to people, get to know them, recognize they're humans just like you. They have emotions, they love, and they get emotional just like you do. But he doesn't know these people, and so he doesn't trust them. They could join our enemies, you know. We never know. We got to make sure they don't do that. So he oppresses Israel, and this is how Israel ends up in slavery to Egypt for 400 years, and then Moses comes along and all this stuff. God uses Moses and everything like that. So they were oppressed. And when I'm reading this account, I'm thinking about John MacArthur's words, and it's if I can sum up what he said, we've forgotten who we are as a people in America. The people and the leaders of our country today, they don't recognize. They never knew. They, again, might have heard about the Puritan foundations of this country, might have heard about the founding fathers and the men who came after them, the men who fought in the Revolutionary War, might have heard about these things, but never knew them. And so, you know, in other words, they're way over there. I mean, what does that have to do with me? We're way past all that stuff now. You know, it's just, you know, why is that important anymore? And then the importance of history is diminished. And then what those people were fighting for goes away. And we repeat the mistakes of the past. And it also brings me back to when I was talking to another brother out in the abortion clinic a few weeks ago. We got into a conversation about history and why history is important. And I remember telling him, you know, the essential sin that we commit, when you boil it all down, the essential sin is that we constantly forget. We always forget. What is the call throughout all of Scripture for Israel, for, you know, and then after Israel, when the new covenant comes in, then you know, for the whole world, to repent. What does repent mean? To turn back. We've wandered. We've forgotten. and we're being called to come back. And then when God is calling his people to come back, what does he so often preface the call with? Who he is. Remember who I am. Remember, I am the God who I'm the God of Abraham, Isaac. He's recalling, when he mentions those names, those are covenantal, that's covenantal language, but he is also recalling to mind when he made those covenants with them. Remember those covenants. Remember the promises I made to your forefathers, to patriarchs. Remember those. And isn't that what we always constantly need? We need to constantly be, I need to constantly be reminded whenever I'm tempted to sin, whenever I'm tempted in this and that and whatever. I need to be constantly reminded, Chase, remember what Christ did for you. Remember. And that's the only way that ever really gets me out. I'll be honest with you. And I fail many times to truly do that. But at the end of the day, that's the only thing that ever gets me out, is when I remember what he's done. That's what Hebrews says. And when Hebrews in chapter 11, looks back on all the patriarchs, they were looking ahead to the promise. In other words, they were remembering the promise of God in a greater country. They were looking ahead to that. And in that, they pushed forward in faith. And then he recalls to mind what Christ did for us. Therefore, being surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us press forward, and breaking off all manner of sin, and then uses Christ as an example. Remember what Christ did. He despised the shame, and in despising the shame, went to the cross because he was looking past it. And so the author is using Christ's sacrifice as an example of how we are to press forward in our own suffering. So remember, and that's what the Lord's Supper is too. Remember it. Remember what he did. And so when we sit here and we think about America and its downfall, I honestly think about this a lot, and I'm always trying to trace back the sources. I'm not I hope I made it clear earlier, but if I didn't, here you go. I'm not interested in just politics, and just, that guy on the left said this, and let's make fun of him for that, whatever. I'm not interested in any of that kind of stuff. I'm not interested in team Republican versus team Democrat. How did we get here? I'm looking for meaningful answers. And I think, really honestly, there is no one answer. There's a lot of factors involved. But if we can kind of put them all together, really it's that we don't know the people who fought, bled for our way of life. We never really knew them. We read about them, like I said, but it's very rare you find that the mind, the inquisitive mind, that really loves and is passionate about history. I like to think I'm one of those minds, but it's just so rare. I almost never see anybody, even among my church, even among my closest believing friends. I rarely see a passion for history. History as it is. I hope I don't go too far off here, but it's tragic to me. One of the greatest tragedies, I don't want to pick on Mormonism here all night, but one of the greatest tragedies of Mormonism, I was reading about and I was watching some stuff on the assassination of Joseph Smith in Carthage in 1844, I believe. Anyways, when you compare really when you compare the actual history of the assassination of Joseph Smith with I hate to say it, but the propaganda that comes out of a lot of Mormon stories, folklore stories really, about it, there's very different, there's a lot of stuff it's a little bit important to really understand that's left out when, especially if you take the tour at the Carthage jail where he was killed. It's still there, and they have the window he fell out of when he was getting shot, fell right in front of the well, and died a couple seconds later. That's all still there. It's fascinating. I would love to go see it, but evidently, if you take the tour, they leave out a lot of information. Again, the tour guides, they're all Mormons. The whole place is owned by the Mormon Church, so they don't tell you about what really went on there. They'll have the general details, but there's some important key details that they leave out. The fact that Joseph Smith had a pistol and he killed 2 people with it. According to records, that's a fact. That's also according to the history of the church, published by the Mormon Church. That he was smuggled in a pistol and shot 3 people, killing 2 of them. And the tour guide, when you take the tour, they don't tell you that stuff. They want to try and paint Joseph as if he went out a true martyr, that he would never have engaged in such violence, that he realized this was the end and went to it and pleading, "My Lord, my God," which apparently he said, "My Lord, my God," but there's good reason to believe that the reason why he was saying that was he was trying to give out a Masonic utterance of distress, because he was a Freemason. That's probably the reason why he didn't finish it. He died before he could finish it, or he fell out the window before he could finish it. I don't know about you, but the last thing I'm thinking about, if I'm falling out a window after having been shot 4 times, at least, is to complete whatever I was saying before I fell out the window. So I would probably be worried about how I'm going to land on the ground. You're 2 stories up. It's not going to be a very pleasant landing. Apparently he lands on his left side, probably broke a hip, if not a couple ribs. I would think he would. But and then died a couple seconds later. It's a horrible way to die. It's sad, honestly. I guess maybe I'm one of those people. I try to put myself there. What was it? What did it look like? I don't like to romanticize history. I try to be as graphic even as I possibly can. When Hiram was shot in the face, what was that like? I mean, I've seen videos of people getting shot in the head and they managed to stand up for a while. It's pretty incredible. The 2 officers, the 2 deputies who just got shot in the head Sunday night, I believe, they kept going. But apparently Hiram fell instantly, which is understandable. Apparently he got shot right here, literally right in the middle of the face. Probably was killed instantly. Or maybe he stumbled and fell backwards and then died right there in the spot. Horrible way to die. I mean, as much as I don't believe Joseph Smith was the man that the Mormon Church makes him out to be, I would not wish that kind of death on anybody. That's just sad. But the point is, it's so sad to me that that place is owned by a church that lies about the real history. Because I'd love to take that tour and know that the guy who's taking me on this tour is telling me the full story. That'd be nice, but I can't trust that he is, and I basically have to do that with every Mormon site I go to. Sadly, I don't. It's not that I want to, but it's sad. It really is sad, because I love history. I want to go take tours into Europe about World War II, about the Reformation, and hear a tour guide. I want to hear our tour guide just tell me what happened. I'm not here to listen to your theological biases get in the way of what actually is going on. I want you to tell me what happened. Okay? That's all I care about. We can talk afterwards what your theology is and what your political views are. Fine. But right now we're on a tour. Right now I am entrusting you to tell me in good faith what happened here, not to lie to me. And that's sad to me, that has to be with the Mormon Church. It really is sad, because there is a lot of history, a lot of great history in Mormonism to look into. Mormonism is definitely connected with a lot of the westward expansion and just America in general, some of the early days. And that makes it sad, because you want to, that's important history right there. But it's almost so incredibly obfuscated by the desperate attempt to make Joseph Smith a man he really never was. So, but that's the thing with history. It's even, let's stop picking on the Mormons here. Even in evangelicalism today, even in my own church, the sad reality is I like I said, I see very few people who are interested in church history. That's tragic to me. I think it is an absolute tragedy. I love to just look at. I look at just, what do we have to fear? You are part of the Christian church that has been on this earth for 2,000 years. Don't you want to know your history, your heritage as a Christian? And sadly, most people don't care. Chances are most evangelicals are part of a church that has the idea that, if you want to just do, lifestyle Christianity, and just sort of get on a shallow basis of what the Christian life is, then come to church on Sundays and come to our weekly Bible studies. That's it. But if you really want to get into the deeper stuff, the deep stuff, well, we have schools for that and classes that are over there. And I'm thinking, I think that there shouldn't be a difference between the two of them. I think the pastor's job is to enlighten the congregation to the deep things of God every Sunday. Yeah, I think that's important. It's very important for the body of Christ to know how God becomes man. Does he cease being God when he becomes man? Is there a fusion with the human nature and the divine nature of some kind? These are important questions, and I think they're on the minds of a lot of people in our churches who don't know how to ask them properly, because they think they're the only ones thinking this, and they're not. But because of the image that so many churches today give, some of these people are without a voice. They don't know how to ask the right questions. And just to address here, you might sit here and say to a guy like me, Chase, I just think that you're being distracted by a lot of this stuff. All this church history and this doctrine and theology, stuff like this. You might be right. You could be right. Maybe I'm being distracted from living the Christian lifestyle, whatever. Or have you considered that maybe that maybe I've just broadened my perspective. I've realized that I've grown up in a puny little box of that I thought was Christianity. And then as I'm growing up, I realized, wow, there is so much more out there. And we just hide ourselves in these gated communities. And as a result, we're like this Pharaoh here. We don't know the people of the past. Martin Luther, is he the guy who fought for civil rights, here in America? That is sad. I have to laugh at it, but it's sad that people don't know who the real Martin Luther is. Because Martin Luther King Jr., I'm not saying that what he did was not important. I'm not saying that at all. Let's be honest, guys. Martin Luther, the German reformer, without what he did, you wouldn't have the United States that Dr. King could then push civil rights, equal rights, and stuff like that for all people. You wouldn't have any of that without the original Martin Luther doing what he did, freeing the gospel from the chains of Rome. But few people know who he is. Few people, the Protestants today, like I said, people who are in a standard evangelical church, they don't know their Protestant roots. They'll go on talking about, the Bible is the infallible word of God, and it's the standard rule of faith and practice for the church. And I'll sit there and I go, oh, you believe in the sola scriptura? And they go, what? Huh? What? What was that? What's that? And I'm like, I sit here and I go, you believe in a doctrine you know nothing about. you walk around here and you pretend like this stuff is just, and obviously it is in the Bible. Obviously, I believe that. I'm not saying it's not. But you act like this stuff is just so, boom, right there. It's just the natural reading of the text. There's no possible way you could ever understand it in any other way. And I look at that and I go, you're in for a rude awakening, because there are people who know more about this than you do, who will tear you to pieces over this. I pray to God you don't end up running into one of them, or that you get studied up on the issue so that when you do run into them, you know what to do. You know what to say. Because, guys, sola scriptura, Christ alone, grace alone, all these things, these came out of the Reformation. And we've almost totally forgotten about that. Luther's dialogue with Erasmus, I never read that, but I've read enough about it to know what it was about. When Erasmus is telling Luther basically that, that this can't be just that simple, it's like if what you're saying is true, Luther, then man's role in salvation, there's no place for it, and that you're saying that it's all up to God and not up to man. Is essentially what Erasmus was saying. He was saying it was just whether or not God predestined you to salvation or not, ultimately. And Luther answers, of course, with the great famous, "You, Erasmus, among all my enemies," basically saying all the people who are going after Luther for his doctrine of justification, his doctrine of faith alone, by grace alone, all that stuff. All the people who were opposing Luther's theology, which was radical in his day, were they would constantly bring up church history issues. They would constantly bring up papacy issues and sacraments and blah 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 blah. But Erasmus, Luther says, of all of his opponents, gets past all that butter and goes straight at where the issue. He says this: you have what's the right word? The hinge upon which it all turns is essentially what Luther said. You Erasmus, of all my opponents, you have struck it right in the bullseye. This is what it was all about. This is the issue of the Reformation. Was grace sufficient in and of itself, the grace of God sufficient for salvation, or was grace? Did grace make it possible to be saved? You have to do the rest. You have to, work up the strength to take that extra leap and then get into the kingdom, basically, with your works and the things that you do, all that stuff. Or was grace in and of itself sufficient? Grace that was God's action, not ours. That was the issue. That's what truly sparked the whole Reformation. And so many Protestants today, and I'm talking about Bible-believing conservative evangelicals, know almost nothing about that history. Almost nothing. Holding to these traditions, which I believe are biblical traditions, have no idea where they come from. And those are the people who are most susceptible to Rome and other stuff, who are most ill-equipped to deal with this culture. What we need in America right now is a reformation. And I believe one of the best ways to know how to do that, we need another Great Awakening. And one of the best ways to figure out how to do that is to know our history about the Great Awakening of the preaching of Jonathan Edwards, George Whitefield, some people say Whitefield. I tend to automatically default to Whitefield, but Whitefield, George Whitefield, and the Reformation itself, how the Reformation and the Great Awakening turned cultures upside down. But, how are we going to be doing that if we don't know the people of our past, if there's no connection with us to them? How can we really, you can open up the Bible and that's great and all. I'm not saying we shouldn't. Obviously that's important. But are you being challenged by it? Is it challenging you? And one of the ways that it can challenge you is to read the men of the past and see what they did. I don't know about you, but when I read some of the men of the past, it's convicting. I'm like, man, look what he did, and like, here I am. What am I doing? I mean, just, jeez, goodness, I'm just terrible. And look what these guys did. I complain about these little things, and these guys, man, practically threw their entire life away, their entire day devoted to service. And how much do I devote to service? Man, it really hits me how bad I am. And so that's what I mean by being challenged by the conviction that these men had. Do you have some of the convictions that like Martin Luther had? What Martin Luther was willing to do for the gospel? Not a whole lot of people, even among our churches, even among our pastors, willing to do some of the things that Luther was willing to do. It's really important, you know. I meant to actually make this about our culture itself, but maybe it's important for us as the church to get hit harder to know these things. But definitely as a culture, the people running around in the streets setting things on fire, setting evidently forests on fire in California. How did it come to this? Because the people who raised them up, those kids up, you know, somebody taught them. You know, they don't just nature abhors a vacuum. Somebody has given them this kind of information about this country and whatnot. And so these leaders who raise up this generation, they don't know who the founding fathers are. They don't know the Puritan tradition. They don't really. And when I say don't know, I mean it in two ways. They don't know it in the sense that, you know, they just don't understand it. And secondly, they just have no empathy towards it whatsoever. And so why should their acolytes feel the same? They don't know. They don't know the history of our country. They don't know any of this. They have no relationship to it whatsoever. And like I said, that brings me to our church. You know, history. I mean, the number one thing about history, why people don't like history, is because they don't see why it's important. Why should I care about what happened to this guy decades and centuries ago? Why does that matter? And that's why a lot of people don't find the Bible interesting. I think that was just way over there. It's outdated. It's way over there. It's got nothing to do with me over here. Well, I think I just found you a passage right here, thousands and thousands of years ago, how it applies to us today. It's not irrelevant. There's a big chunk of history, of lesson right here. What happens when a generation doesn't really know the ones that came before it? And so what's the remedy? The remedy is, man, I got this itch on my nose. I don't know. I cannot get rid of it. The remedy is, I feel like I'm just a broken record right now. I don't know how to make this more grand and spectacular. To teach, not just teach history to our kids, but in such a way that it's interesting to them, that they see that you're not just giving them an academic exercise. And I think sometimes the best way to do that is, you know, I hear everybody who's gone over to Jerusalem or Israel. They say they come back and like it's just changed the way they see things. It was just like incredible, one of the most amazing things, and I really would want to do that one day. I want to have that experience, that mind-blowing experience. But that's the same thing with like pretty much I'd love to go see all these historical places. And because what I think it does is you can sit there and you can read it in your Bible, you know, about this place, this happened so and so, and in this place, and blah 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 blah. So you can read it there and you can picture it in your mind. But see, again, like I was saying earlier, there's no personal interaction with it. It's all in your mind, really. It's like when I went to go see the Grand Canyon. I was seeing pictures of it constantly. It's like, wow, that thing looks pretty amazing. It ain't nothing like when you see it with your own eyes. I mean, I'll never forget that. And I think one reason why I'll never forget about it is because I didn't take a whole lot of pictures. I was just using my eyes most of the time. I wasn't sitting there just snap, 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 walking around just snapping pictures. I took maybe 3 pictures and that was about it. The rest of the time I just spent, man, just looking at this thing. I'm like, look at this thing. I mean, oh my gosh, it didn't even look real. It looked fake. And I remember it vividly. But it's totally different when you see it, because that's really when it hits you. This is real. This is real. You know, there's just a tendency to mythologize things, like what unfortunately what Mormons do with Joseph Smith. They kind of turn him into a mythical figure. When he was a man like us, he was a very mischievous man, very charismatic man, but an ordinary guy. Dies like any one of us, you know, and died a pretty poor way, sadly. But yeah, and so really, I think most Mormons, I think most Christians, and even some non-Christians who know the real Joseph Smith, believe in him in a certain sense more than Mormons do, because they know the real Joseph Smith. They know him as he really was. And I think because Mormons have a very romanticized view of, I mean, even the pictures of Joseph Smith, I saw a picture that was apparently an actual photograph of Joseph Smith. You could see how the later imagery of him sort of resembles it, but the later imagery is like almost anime of Joseph Smith. Makes him look like not a flaw on his face. I mean, just the perfect facial features and everything. I mean, it romanticizes him, and it ironically turns him into more of a mythical figure than anything else. That seeing where he walked and like, you know, seeing where Jesus walked, for example, and where Martin Luther walked, where all these historical figures, really sobers you up to any of the romantic ideas you had of these people, and just realizing this was real, and therefore it's important. It's important to preserve, to know these things. And so I think that's one great way to help teach kids the value and the importance of history, is to take them to these, you know, we take our kids to Disneyland at Disney World, and that's fine. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. Right now there is, apparently, but nothing seriously wrong with that. But how many parents can have a kid who says, we went on a Reformation tour last year? I mean, like, we went to Normandy and we saw the beaches of Normandy, and we took a tour. We saw the bunkers and everything. I would want my kid to say something like that, and see that my kid knew that history was so important. Not the history that he or she wants to hear, but the history that needs to be told, because it's so important. I truly believe one of the reasons you're seeing all the violence right now is most of those people who are out there rioting and everything like that know absolutely nothing about the history of their heritage, where they came from. None. No connection to it. As it says here, do not know their roots. And there you go. That's what we're dealing with, you know. Well, I think I've said everything here. I went over a little bit, but I hope you stuck around to listen and see what's so important about knowing your history. Soli Deo Gloria. God bless. Talk to you later. Bye.